equipment. It's probably one of the hottest places right now in the United States. We've been invited out to this property, and there's just a ton of activity going on. So we're hoping to go out there with all of our recording equipment and do a couple shows on location for you guys. So look for that here in the next couple weeks. We should have that up on the website. On Sunday, we're actually going to be talking to a gentleman, and I don't want to give too much of it away right now, but it's probably going to end up an extended show. There's just so much activity going on this property. And I spent about 2.5, 3 hours on the phone with him yesterday, really talking with this guy, going over all of the different activity on his property. And the more and more him and I talked, the more and more it reminded me of when I talked to Mike Humphreys from the Siege of Hanabi. This situation's a little bit different, but there's a lot of similarities in talking to both of these guys. So look for that on Sunday. Tonight we're going to be talking with Tom, and he had an encounter, and I want to welcome Tom to the show.
Hi, Tom. How are you this evening?
Good. How are you doing, Will?
I'm good. Well, let me start by asking you, how long ago did this event take place and what part of the country is it in?
I went to look back through, I had sent some emails to some researchers here in Ohio. I was having trouble with the exact year until I located my emails that I had sent to these researchers, and it was in October of 2004.
Okay. So tell us, what were you doing prior to the event taking place, and sort of walk us into what happened?
Well, I was deer hunting on the day of the sighting. Now, prior to my sighting, I had been to this particular area of Mohican State Forest in Ashland County, Ohio, about maybe a dozen times. I would go there and go to deer hunt, set up. I would see deer sign, you would see tracks, I would see droppings. Occasionally I would see, a deer, but they would be too far off because I was bow hunting at the time. Did you want to hear things that had happened to me previously when I had the sighting?
Yeah, you can talk about that if you'd like.
Okay. Well, what I would do, because I hunt mostly public land in Ohio, I'll go to different state forest and wildlife management areas. And I'll go and I'll scout some areas. I usually try to go away from where most of the crowd would be. Now, during bow season in Ohio, generally you don't run into too many bow hunters as it is. It's usually during the gun week season that you run into everybody. So I was down at Mohican, just driving around looking for places, kind of getting the lay of the land. I stopped and got a map of the state forest, the boundaries and everything. So I ended up locating an area that was, I don't think too many people would have located it because it ends at a dead end area into a parking area. And I went back in there, found a spot, really liked it because when I went back in there, I would pass by 3 or 4 farms that would have corn as their agriculture. And in Ohio, if you don't have a good mass crop of acorns for the year, the deer will generally go feed on whatever they can, and sometimes that's hitting the cornfields. So this, to me, was a perfect spot because there was nobody back in here. There were the farms there. The food supply was there. I had seen the deer. So it's just a matter of just going back and sitting and waiting.
Okay.
The first couple of times when I went back in there, I would get like a creepy feeling. Just something didn't seem right, but you tell yourself, okay, look, there's, the feeling, there's nothing to be alarmed, there's nothing, what is this all about? So just go and enjoy yourself. So you talk yourself out of it. So I would go back in. The one time I went back in, well, this happened on actually 2 occasions. I would go in. Sometimes I would take my flashlight with me because I would stay till dark. Sometimes I would try to leave early if I didn't carry a flashlight with me. So the nights that I did have a flashlight, on me, I would stay till after sunset and walk out. On 2 occasions when I was walking out on this trail area, I would hear footsteps paralleling me on my left-hand side. So I would walk, and I would hear it, and I'm thinking, what in the world is this sounding? I would stop, shine my light over into the woods, wouldn't see anything, would start walking again, hear it again, stop, shine my lights over into the woods, and just trees. There's a lot of pine trees, a lot of just large trees in the area. So, I'd keep walking, and that happened on 2 occasions. So I just brushed it off as it being a deer or something, raccoons maybe even. So that had happened. Another time when I was at this location, I would get the feeling that, like, just being watched. And it would be so strong that I would turn around several times looking to see if there would be somebody standing there, and just there never was. There would be times where I would hear no animal sounds, even though I would see squirrels. I would see raccoons at various times of the day, because I would go and sit pretty much an entire day if I could. And there were times when I wouldn't see any animals. I remember one time just sitting there, just only hearing the breeze blowing through, like, the pine trees, and just this kind of a creepy feeling. On the day, well, before that, the sighting, where my stand was, I actually had a stand where it was like a log. It was a down log that I would sit on. It was kind of up. When I explain it, the trail would be above me on the ridge. The cornfield would be up on top of across from the trail up on the ridge. So I would try to come down about halfway down on the ridge and try to catch the deer coming from this valley or this gorge area. So one time I was sitting there, it was getting dark, so I decided to call it evening. And as I stood up, I would generally go and take a few steps, a couple yards forward, just to kind of creep and see if I would see anything. Because sometimes I've gotten deer when you would, at that time, that twilight time. Well, as I stood up, I noticed something white down in this really thick, brushy area. And I'm looking at it, so I started taking a little bit closer, and here it was a deer skull with antlers. So I thought, oh, that's pretty neat. I want to grab that and take it and use it for an antler shed and for my deer mounts. So I bent over to pick it up. As I picked it up, I heard this really low growl come from behind me in this brambleberry thicket bush. I spun around with my crossbow in my hand. I'm looking in this bush, and I'm trying to see what's in there. And it kind of unnerved me, because I'm like, where did this come from? So I'm looking, waited, never heard anything. So then that's when I ended up leaving the area. On the day of my sighting, I ended up going back, parked my car. Nobody else was in the area. In this area, from the parking area, you have a 2-lane like dirt track that leads back to probably about 150, 200 yards back in. There's an oil gas well. So it looks like, where a Jeep or a truck would go back in there to get that. Off to the right, there's sort of an old hiking trail that leads down into a valley, or there's actually a gorge in this area. So as I pull in, park, I try to be as quiet as possible, because whenever I go deer hunting, I try to, pull in, I don't slam car doors, I just push them shut. So I got out as quiet as I could. And instead of going down the hiking trail towards where my stand was, where this log was on the ground, I decided to go back. Well, as I was walking, my left boot, because I was wearing these rubber-soled boots, because it had rained a few days prior, and there's some mud and gush, and so I would walk and that stuff. So it would make the squeaking noise. So as I was walking, I would try to only take 2 or 3 steps, okay, with the squeaking. Well, when I closed the door and I started walking, I heard you have the 2 trail track that leads back into the woods. To the left is a cornfield, and to the right is the wood line that is on an incline that heads down into the gorge area. I heard this commotion over in the wood line. I'm thinking, okay, it's possibly deer coming up, going into the cornfield to feed on it. So I'm trying to creep along, but my boot's like making the squeak. And I'm trying to only go 2 or 3 steps, look, maybe catch a deer because I was hearing all this commotion. Did this for about 80 to 100 yards. Made it back. It was going on about 7:30 maybe. The sun was setting, and I didn't have my flashlight on me. And I was like, well, do I really want to stay? Because I was bow hunting earlier in the day at another area at Mohican. So I turned around, saw the sun was setting, so I'm like, well, I'm just going to walk back and head home. So as I'm walking back, now I'm turned around. The cornfield is to my right. The wood line is to my left, going down into this gorge. And I'm not walking super fast, but not super slow either. I'm just kind of taking, 10, 12 steps, stopping and looking. Well, as I get halfway back to the parking area, I'm looking to my left, and it was standing behind a tree, and it just took off running. It was jet black, and it ran down the incline down into the gorge. It ran on 2 legs, and I just remember the legs were really weird looking on it, and then the back of the head, which sat up on the shoulders. Now, this creature wasn't very big. I mean, it was bigger than me, but it wasn't overly huge. And I remember there being a white patch of hair on the back of its head across the top of its shoulders and sort of down, not to the middle of the back, but just above the middle of the back. And at first I thought this was like a hood. And I figured, okay, there's a person running with their hood. But then as I watched it, I mean, it ran unbelievably fast down this incline. The way it ran, like I said, when I looked at its legs as it was running, it didn't look right. Its arms were out in front. They were bent. The creature itself was sort of slouched over forward. And when it ran, it had this really weird gait, almost as if it was a wobble to it. But it took off, ran straight down to the bottom of that valley gorge area. So I'm standing there. I'm looking at it, at what happened. I'm replaying in my mind. I'm like, did I just see that? And I'm like, yeah, I just saw that. So I hurry up and run back to my Jeep truck that I had at the time. Got in my Jeep truck, sat there, and I'm replaying this. I'm like, did I just see what I just thought I saw? There's no way that I just saw what I just saw. So as I'm sitting there, I come to a realization, I'm trying to play out, is the person, no, it moved way too fast. It was covered in hair. The legs on it looked really awkward. The way it ran, it just didn't look like a person. So I thought to myself, I think I might have just seen one of these, a Bigfoot. So I had to go tell somebody. And I'm like, well, do I call the county sheriff? What do I do? Well, at the state forest, there's a ranger station. So I drove down there, and the ranger station, the ranger building, is a old 1970s looking split level home. And there was a ranger car there. So I pulled in, got out, went to the front, was pounding on the window. Nobody came, was pounding on the window. After, I'd say about another minute or two, finally a ranger came out. He was thin, a little bit taller than me. I'm 6 foot, red hair, wearing glasses in his uniform. And the first thing I told him that came out of my mouth was, I'm not crazy, and I have to tell somebody that I just seen something up on this county route up on the north side of the forest. and I said, you guys don't have any black bears in the area. And I knew that. We don't, occasionally we'll have black bears are reported. They're starting to become more prevalent now because they're coming over from Pennsylvania. But at the time, I knew that this wasn't a black bear because it ran on two legs, and the way it ran and how quick it was, and it was quiet. It didn't make any noises when it ran. I was telling him this, what I had just seen, and he's just standing there looking at me, and he's not saying anything. He's not denying what I saw. He's not saying what he thinks it is. And I said, look, I don't want to make a formal report. I just wanted to tell somebody because I had to tell somebody. And he pretty much didn't say anything to me. Got home, told my wife what happened, because when I walked in the door, she's like, the look on my face, she's like, what happened to you today? And I told her what I had seen and what had happened. So then the following day, I got on the computer and ended up typing in Bigfoot reports for Ohio. And that's when it popped up with the Eastern Ohio Bigfoot group, which is who Don Keating was affiliated with, and then also the Northeastern Ohio Bigfoot group, which I think Mike, from what I remember reading the email, is who was a part of that. So I sent both of them the reports of what I had seen and what had happened. Don emailed me back asking, for my phone number, information, some other things. So I sent him an email back saying, look, I'm not interested in any, notoriety, or at the time I was working for the state of Ohio, as a government employee, with children and families. And I was like, look, I don't want, anybody, this to come out and make a huge scene about it. But I just want to let you know this is what I had seen, because I had to let other people know. So he mailed me back and said, yeah, I got your information. Thank you for your information. I guess he was following up on some other sightings that were at that time. I get a call from this Northeast Ohio Bigfoot research. They give me a call. I talked with them, told them what I had seen, what was going on. They're like, well, to their understanding, as I was looking back through my emails, mine was the fifth report that their group had received in the past month or two. And they decided they wanted to get a team together and go down to the area as quickly as possible to look at the area. So I said, okay, just email me a day as to when you want to go down there and when I would be available. So less than a week, I would say. I met them down there on the weekend. This was the first time I got back. I was back there because I did not want to go back. There were three men that showed up from the Northeast Ohio Bigfoot research. They did some small talk, and we were talking, and again, I explained to them what had happened, and I really did not want to go back in there with them. And they told me most likely that if, it was Bigfoot, not going to be there, and you have nothing to worry about. So I ended up going back about halfway on the dirt trail to show them down where I had first seen the creature run from behind the tree, which would have been only at about maybe 45 yards for me. They asked where the rest of the trail went, and I said, well, it goes back to a gas well. So I just stayed on the trail. They went down, looked down by where the tree was at. They said they noticed some larger boulder rocks that had looked like they were overturned, as if something was looking underneath the rocks. Then when they went back down further, there was also a high-tension electrical wire pathway back there, clear-cut by the oil well. They went back there, and when they came back, they said that they found some stick formations around the base of some trees, which I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't see the stick formations, so So, in a nutshell, they pretty much said, we believe you had a sighting. This looks like a prime area that there could be a sighting, that they had received sightings. Like I said, mine was the fifth one within the month or two. The one sighting they said that they received just before mine was that there was a hiker that was down in the gorge area, and they said that there were not one but two Bigfoots, and there was a larger one and a smaller one, and they were throwing rocks at the hiker. So I was like, I'm glad that wasn't me. So,
how far away do you think you were when you saw the creature running?
About 40 to 45 yards. The only I guesstimate that is because I belong to a gun club, and they have the rifle ranges of 25 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards, 200 yards, and so I was measuring it at the 50-yard mark.
And I know it's hard to answer this question, but how fast do you think it was running?
I probably saw it for 3 seconds, 4 seconds at the most, and it would have covered, easily 100 yards down into that. And this was down an incline into the gorge area. And like I said, I've seen deer, when deer move really fast, I would say it was as swift as a deer, and make any sounds and just covered it like nothing.
I'm kind of curious, too. What did the forest ranger eventually say to you? Was it just when you get done telling your story, was he like, okay, well, and was that kind of the end of the conversation? Or
no, he just had a straight face on him. He let me explain, and I do a lot of talking, so I kept talking, and he just listened. And he wouldn't say, he was like, well, we have had bear in the area. But I told him, I said, bear don't run on two legs the way this thing did. This thing did not look like a bear. The legs on it just didn't match up with its body, to me, is what it seemed. And the speed it went. And I'm like, it wasn't a person. Because initially I thought it was a person, because it was on two legs. And like I said, it was all in black, except for this white on the back of its head and shoulder and upper back area. And that's why I thought it was a hood, but then I thought, why would there be a person out here? I never ran into anybody when I was out at this part of the forest. So he just listened to me, said that they had bear reports, but really didn't go, just didn't deny. He didn't say, well, I think this is what you saw. He just didn't say anything.
Interesting. Do you still hunt in that area?
No. No.
Yeah. I don't blame you.
No. And I don't even now, like this year, I went out for 3 days during the gun season. And even then, I only went in about 100 yards off a road. And I used to love to camp. I used to love to go out and just go and be out in the woods. But ever since then, because I was always 50-50 that there was a possibility that these things existed.
Right.
50% I was hoping they didn't, because I just didn't ever want to run into anything or have any problems. I just, I wanted to be out, maybe be the top, animal out there in the woods and hunting, and just, it's, when I do go out, like I said, it's not very far from a road, and I'm definitely out before it's dark, and I don't go in until the sun's up.
You go by yourself, or you go with somebody else?
That's the thing. I usually go by myself, because most of the people I know don't hunt.
Okay.
And the creature you saw wasn't that big, right? When you were describing it, that could be
not as in like overly big, bulky. I'm 6 foot. I would say it was easily anywhere from 6 to 7 feet. It was big, but not
right. It wasn't King Kong running.
No.
Sounds like maybe you startled it coming up, and it just made a break for. Were you walking towards where it was behind the tree when it took off running?
Yes, because when I first when I got out of the parking area and I decided to go down the two trail track, that's where I heard the commotion in the right, which I thought were the deer coming up. into the cornfield on my left. And so that's when I started taking 2 steps, 3 steps, just kind of still hunting back towards the gas oil area. But by the time I got back to that point, I turned around, I'm like, it's getting late. I don't think when I'm bow hunting, I didn't bring a flashlight, so even if I shoot a deer, I'd have to come back tomorrow morning and get it. So that's when I turned around and just started to kind of, like I said, casually walk back, but still now kept an eye to my left because I heard that sound. And as I got halfway back to the parking area, that's when it took off from behind the tree, and it was running perpendicular but away from me down into the gorge area.
That's an interesting encounter. It's I can imagine even having one run away from you is still as terrifying. Well, maybe not as terrifying as one running towards you, but just seeing something like that.
Better running away.
Yeah, just seeing something like that, I can imagine just standing there going, did that just happen? I mean, even after, and I'm sorry to the audience for bringing up mine and Woody's encounter, but even after our encounter, there's so many moments where you're like, did that really happen? Did we actually see that? And when you say that, that's, again, I apologize to the audience for bringing it up, but like when you're saying it, Tom, I get what you're saying. I can just imagine you going back to your truck and sitting there and thinking, did I just see that? Was that a bear? Was that and trying to figure out what it is. And being a hunter, it wasn't a bear, but I think your mind tries to rationalize, tries to place what you just saw.
Yeah, it's a pinch yourself moment, where you're trying to say, hey, am I sure about that?
Right. And when I was talking with the 3 gentlemen that had came down to the area, they told me it's not uncommon for you to be in disbelief and say, no, you didn't see this, you did it, and you keep trying to tell yourself this didn't happen. But I know it happened, and I've seen it, and I'm like, that's what's unnerving about it, is the fact that, it's changed me to the point where now I don't want to go out and deer hunt, even though I really love it. It's changed completely.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you ever seen that movie Men in Black?
Is that the one with
Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that moment in the movie, and I laugh every time I see it. They go into this jewelry place or whatever it is. Tommy Lee Jones ends up blowing the head off of the alien, and he grows back another head, and then he points his gun back to this head, act like he's going to blow it off. And when it's all over with, they go outside, and Will Smith is sitting there, and he looks up at the moon, and then he looks over, and he's watching people ride a bike. And Tommy Lee Jones walks up, and he says something to the effect of, "You're trying to catch you're trying to get away from the moment, or you're trying to get back to reality," or I forget exactly what he says. He says something to that effect to Will Smith.
No, you're exactly right. And
and then he says, "I can't help you," and he turns around and walks off.
Yeah, you're kind of stuck with the knowledge,
Yeah,
right. And I kept trying to tell myself, was that a person? But then, as fast as it ran, and again, the legs on it, and the way it ran, it just was the weirdest gait that I'd ever seen. And another thing that they were asking is if I had smelled anything in the area before. And in all of the times that I've ever been out there, I had never smelled any rotten, because they had asked if I had smelled anything that would smell like a skunk or anything like that. And I said, no, even on the day of my sighting, I didn't smell anything. And you're right. Go ahead.
And that's normal. That's normal. Most often witnesses don't.
Yeah, it's life-changing, and it's just, I don't know.
Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the encounter. It's
no problem.
Interesting account.
Very interesting account, yeah. Especially its behavior. It made me think if maybe it was a young one running off and just figuring.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, maybe thinking he was seen, and even though you didn't actually see him, maybe you thought you saw him and then decided it's time to go. You don't know. You wish you could be there in the moment of those encounters. I'm sure you've gone through it in your head a million times, Tom.
Mm-hmm. And it's just, and you still tell yourself, no, it can't be possible, but it is because you did see it. And then you try to rationalize it and put it into some type of, some kind of words and say, okay, this is what it is, but it doesn't match any of those things. And you're like, this is the only thing I could have seen.
Yeah, I was kind of interested in the park ranger's response to you. I talked to a witness earlier in the week, and I took a report from a gentleman who I'm trying to get to come on the air, but a real nice guy. And he was basically saying they were out in this area, and him and his girlfriend and his dog were walking along this trail. And as they were coming up to this kind of a bend in the trail, his dog took off running. It was one of those little yapper dogs that wasn't afraid of anything. Well, it took off running, and his girlfriend was telling him she wanted to leave the area. Something wasn't right. She just wanted to leave. And, he was saying, well, I got the day off. Let's go for a walk. So they get the dog. The dog is basically almost dragging them off. And he says on the other side of these raspberry bushes or blackberry bushes, all of this debris starts coming towards him. Like it was throwing rocks. It was throwing armfuls of debris at him. And he yelled at the who he thought was a person at the time. He was yelling at, and it stopped for a second, and then it started up again, like something was just throwing debris at him. So they finally left, and this guy didn't really believe in Bigfoot, but he went down and talked to one of the park rangers, and what he said to the park ranger was, hey, I think you have some hikers up there, some drunks up there. Here's what happened. Starts telling the guy what happened, and the park ranger's response to him was kind of odd. He said to him, well, we don't have monsters up here that do that. And his response back was, he said, I never said monsters. He said, I think there's either a hiker up there or there's a drunk and the park ranger kind of looked at him and then tried to backpedal out of the conversation, was like, well, I'll look into it but it was kind of funny. The park ranger kind of jumped the gun a little bit and said, well, we don't have monsters up here that do that. And his response back was, I never said monster. I said there was either a hiker or a drunk or, so I was kind of interested in the park ranger's response. It makes you wonder, it's probably not the first time he's heard something like this. I almost wonder if they're prepped to give responses or not give responses based on what someone says.
And that's after thinking about it. I mean, like I said, he just stood there and he didn't deny what I was seeing or, what it could have been. And just, I wish I would have got his name. Yeah, he didn't give a whole lot of information. But again, I was like talking out and saying, this is what I seen, this is where it's at. Have you guys had any reports or anything like this?
Welcome to the show, everyone. We are heading out of town. We're going to a location, as I mentioned on the show on Tuesday. We are heading out to a location that's probably one of the hottest locations in the United States, and we're going to take a lot of equipment out with us. We'll be doing a lot of shows there on site, so I'm excited about it. I know Shan's excited about it. We're really hoping to come back with some solid evidence and some great content for everyone on the site.
Yep, should be awesome. Can't wait to go.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that since we'll be gone all week. When we come back, there won't be any shows this week, but when we do come back, we'll be sharing all of that stuff with everyone. Tonight on the show, we're actually going to be talking with Corky, and I came across Corky on Facebook, and he was posting a lot of pictures and talking about stuff he had going on his property. Talked to him yesterday for about a couple hours and talked about all the different experiences he's had on his property. So it should be an exciting night. I want to welcome Corky to the show.
How you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Corky.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Before we actually get into all this stuff going on your property, prior to all of this going on your property, what was your knowledge of the subject? I mean, how did you feel about the subject of Sasquatch?
good question. My father dragged me to a bunch of events as a child, 7, 8, 9 years old. There was a viewing of the Patty film, like in 1975, and we went, and I viewed it. I was probably, 8, 9 years old at the time. I was introduced to the film. I actually had an encounter myself at the age of 12, leaving my uncle's property on my way to my grandmother's house. I did not think it was a Bigfoot at the time. They have a long lane that I had to travel, about a quarter of a mile. As I was en route to grandmother's house, I heard something following me up on the ridge. And when I stopped, it would stop. And I would look up, and I seen something looking back at me that I couldn't explain. I first thought it was a bear. Now, I'm in really good shape at that time, and I took off running as fast as I could. And I heard it to the right of me up on that ridge run along right with me. And then I stopped. I looked back, and it stopped with me. And I actually thought, I can't, it's been such a long time ago. I swore I saw red eyes, but it could have been something else. I can't put my finger on it. But anyhow, I ran down to grandmother's house in record time and told Dad all about it. And he told me there has been, this is like 1979, 1980 at that time. And Dad informed me, this is the time where there was a local town, Minerva, was having a lot of problems, a lot of sightings with Sasquatch. And there was actual sighting in that area where we were at 6 months prior. And he said, son, you probably saw a Squatch. And was I a believer? I'm little. I don't know. That's just what I was told.
What time of day was it when you were?
That was 11:30 at night, 11 o'clock. I had to be home by 11. So let's say 10 to 11. I had to be down at grandmother's at 11. And so it was right before the stroke of 11. I ran down. Yeah. So from that point to, I would say I was 30 years old. Deep down inside, I did not believe. Really, because, I just figured if the creature was real, that they would have found it by then, the way America's growing, it's less and less areas for them to live in. I just figured it must be just a myth. So I had mixed feelings, okay, as a child. I believed when I was young. As I grew older, I really didn't believe. And that led into now that I believe.
Yeah. No, and that's understandable. I think a lot of people feel that way. I know Shannon's originally from here in Washington, and so she understands how much open land there is. And I've never been to Ohio, but I know up here, like in Washington and Oregon, I think people out towards the East Coast would be kind of surprised at how much open land there is. But it's definitely a valid type of feeling. God, we're expanding so much. Why hasn't this thing really been found yet? I think it has been. But I wanted to ask you, so you moved into where you're at now, and 2 years ago, things started happening around the property. Do you want us to kind of walk us through what was going on, what you first noticed?
Well, what I did was, there was actual sighting 7 miles north of where I lived at a undisclosed area. It made the papers. There was investigators called in. They had a town hall meeting. I attended. Anyhow, long story short, a month later, I decide to do a sound blast. We'll get some friends over, just do a sound blast. Collected some sounds off the internet, broadcasted them. Within 45 minutes, we had activity. We had whoops, we had growls, we had rocks thrown at us. So anyhow, after that event, this was only a joke. All right. I was only doing this just to have fun. I was playing with it. And I think I did something, I went a little too far, because after the party, they didn't go away. I called them in. I live on top of a ravine, and there's a lot, how do I word this? There's a lot of cover. There's a lot of places for them to hide. They can be back there and be totally undetected. They're only here from what I've seen from July through October. That's when I have most of my activity.
You invited some friends over. What sounds did you play?
I collected a series of different sounds from different websites, but what I started with was the Sahara sounds.
Interesting.
Yes, and it took about 45 minutes. We would stop. We'd shoot for 10 minutes intervals and then stop, listen, 10 minutes, stop, listen. And after about 45 minutes, we stopped and, we started hearing stuff. We first, my one buddy thought he heard a tree knock, so we're all listening, and we heard another tree knock at another on top of the hill, and then there was some rustling in the brush down over the hill. And next thing you know, we've got small pebbles and rocks being hurled at us.
So what's going through your mind at this point?
There was a couple people there that were saying, "Oh, no, you didn't hear nothing. It was just a wild animal." And then there was a few of us, it's like, let's go investigate. Let's go check this out. So a bunch of us, it was 4 of us. We walked up on top of my hill and walked back into the second tier, and we all had flashlights, and I had one of those little, flashlights you put on your forehead. But anyhow, I walked probably about 40 yards back in on top, and I panned down to the left, and I got eye shine looking right back at us. And two buddy of mine, we both seen it at the same time, and we actually watched him duck his head into the high grass. We stand there, and now he was probably 40 yards away from us to the left, halfway down into the ravine, behind a tree and some heavy brush for cover. But for 2 seconds, he stared at us, and it was kind of freaky. So we stopped. We decided to turn around, go back. We started walking back. Now I have a third tier above where we're walking, be about another 50 yards on up. And we heard something following us from the top of the ridge as we're walking back. Every time we stopped, it would stop. And it was just, it was very exciting, but it was also, scary at the same time. So we ended up going back to the house, and when we got back to the house, that is when we got the reports of, the people that were on the deck. They said, "Cork, we've had 2 rocks thrown at us since you guys been gone. Did anybody go down below us and throw rocks up at us?" I said, "No, we've been up on top of the hill." And it was probably about another half an hour later, another rock come in and hit the porch, and I actually took a picture of it and put it on my research page. And
before we get too far along, did you guys have the impression that it was just one creature or possibly more than one?
No, there was 3 of us. There was not 3 of us. There was 3 of them. There was one down underneath our bridge, down off our property. There's a large bridge that goes over a creek. There was one underneath there. There was one at somewhere where we seen at the ravine, and there was one up on the wood line close to our property. So there were, that I could count, three different events that 3 different creatures were reacting.
This is the first year this is kind of the first event over the first year. What else did you start to notice around the property?
This would have been September 21st of like 2 years ago. Shortly after, we started hearing the tree knocks at night, hearing screams. I would even hear a baby crying in the woods, which that we never heard that before. We actually heard a baby crying, which was just crazy. And I'm thinking, well, what animal would be crying like a baby? So that I decided to start, doing audio recordings and at night. But what what really shook us up, it was probably a week later. It was a Friday night. My son was a freshman, got home from his football game, and, you know, his responsibility is to put his beagle away at night when we come in. So the beagle was on top of his box, and my son walked up to the box. He was petting his dog before he put it away. He's still fully dressed in his football uniforms, the shoulder pads, shirt, and everything. And he heard a crash come from the top of the hill on the right side, and just something running right at him. And he looked up, and there was a 8-foot creature looking directly at him, 6 feet away, staring him down eye to eye. My son reports seeing greenish yellowish, golf ball sized eyes. And then he said he heard a tree knock to his left, extremely loud. And then the beast took off and ran towards the other one who did the tree knocking. One thing my son reported to me, he goes, "Dad, it was crazy." He goes, "I heard this thing crash down, come down over the hill. I thought he was going to take the dog." And he stopped, and then after we did a stare down, he said when it took off, it was like it was floating. He goes, "It moved so quick, but there was no sound." And then he looked, he was just in shock. He's standing there, and then he seen another creature partially over the ravine looking back at him with red eyes. And he put his dog in the kennel, and he ran in the house, and he reported it to me. That's when I started the documentation. And I started next morning. I'm looking for sign. Next morning, he told me exactly where he was standing. I found tracks. And my heart's racing. I'm like, are you kidding me? Is this really true? We did a role play because my son said the one with the red eyes was only 6 foot tall. So we did a role play, and I walked back to where he told me where it was, and I stood where it was. Here it was 6 feet over the ravine, standing on a little ledge. So I went back there and stood, and he said, "Dad, it was 6 foot taller than you." So it had been every bit 12 foot tall.
Yeah, the description he gave of it floating, I mean, I kind of understand what he's saying that's the first thing I remember what he said was, it had floated across the road. And they're so smooth, they're so fast, and they're so quick that when you see them, I can just imagine it taking off from directly in front of him and him having that impression of like, well, it just kind of floated away. It just kind of, I'm sure it's like no other animal he's ever seen. What was your impression of what was going on there? Do you think it was after the dog and then they kind of came face to face? Yeah.
Yes. That's what started happening after that event. Once this has been brought to my attention and I started, looking to see the creature myself and looking for any evidence that it leaves behind, I'm convinced now through the recordings that I'm doing at night that they were trying to intimidate the dog, and they also tried intimidating us. About a week later, again on Friday night, they had a home football game, and just from the announcing, from the speakers from the football game, which the football field's probably about a mile away from our ridge, and the echo coming down through the ravine, it just sounded, it's mangled, and it sounds like what you would find in a haunted house, really scary sounds by the time it bounces off the hillside. But anyhow, it was the following week. I'm in the house, and I hear something just going crazy at 8:30 at night, just beating on a tree outside. And I open up a window, actually my son's bedroom window, and I hang my head out the window, and there's I mean, it sounded like a herd of elephants stomping their feet, running through our woods. And I'm listening, I can hear the echo of the football game just roaring through our ravine. And these creatures who just recently came onto our property, were very stirred up. They were upset. They were just pounding on the trees. There was a plastic sled that was left over the hill. They picked that up and just beat the tar out of this tree with this long plastic sled. And I panicked, and I got online, and I'm looking up for a group I can call, somebody who would know something on the subject. And I ended up calling someone from the Jawaspel Project, and I hung my cell phone out the window, and they were able to hear what I was hearing, and their information to me was to go load my gun. So it was pretty intense.
Yeah, you wonder how that sound messed with them. I mean, I can kind of get that from down in a ravine, off in the distance there's a football game going on or a baseball game, people are cheering. And sound does weird things in the forest. It bounces around and it does a lot of weird things, especially in little valleys and whatnot. And it's just amazing that you think those two things were directly related. They were just tripping out over the sound and just tearing everything apart.
That's exactly what was going on, yeah.
So, Corky, for you feel like they obviously, for a certain portion of the year, they live in extremely close proximity to your house, and they feel like that's their area.
Exactly. At night eventually they started tossing little small rocks up on the deck, and they were pounding on my dog box. They were screaming.
Well, one note I want to make, Corky, before we start getting into that is so that people listening so they understand. They started clear cutting an area kind of close to your property. I guess the theory goes that because of all that clear cutting going on, they've now changed their ranges and kind of where they're going, and it kind of funneled them into the backside of your property as a travel corridor. Is that kind of what you and I were talking about the other day?
Yes, the oil and gas industry hit our area right about this time. And, they were clear cutting, they're running pipelines, they're drilling. And when they're drilling, they run 30 days, 24/7, and with big lights, and they're loud, so very easily these creatures have been pushed out of where they've probably been their whole lives and no longer feel comfortable. So they were pushed, and they just recently showed up at our property. That is correct. One thing interesting about my property, it's probably one of the fourth highest points in our county. It's right where the glacier stopped. So we have, the town that I live outside of, it sits down into a valley. There's a pretty big name creek that comes through that feeds into the Ohio River. You can easily cross through my property, the ridge, the whole way, and you can see for miles. So, yeah. It's very appealing for somebody who wants to get from one location to another and not be noticed.
Well, talk a little bit about what was going on with the dog. So your son has this encounter where it comes up and does a bluff charge, and they're looking at each other. It takes off, and then there's so many things I want to get to. I want to get to the mimicking. I want to get to the peeing story. But before we jump ahead to any of that stuff, can you talk about kind of what happened next? You started noticing they were kind of terrorizing your dog?
Right, exactly. Again, a lot of my information was I'm being woken up in the middle of the night by the dog barking, and I got in a habit with, opening up my bedroom window so I can hear all the sounds that's going on. And that's exactly what was going on. Was at night, they were trying to figure out how to get my dog out of that kennel, and they just couldn't do it. And they would sit there and just antagonize him. Eventually, they've listened to us calling him. They know him by name. They were even calling him by name. So I found that incredibly interesting, that they were trying to communicate with my dog and trying to lure him out of his cage, and I believe to harm him.
So they would mimic your voice to call your dog out into the woods.
Yes.
Wow.
There's many times I've been in the evening, just walking around the backyard, and I heard my voice, or it sounded like me, yelling, "Cookie." You know, I would always say, "Cookie, sit," and I would hear that coming from the top of the hill. That is
sounds
correct.
familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Excuse me?
it's disturbing. No, she said it sounds familiar, and it does sound very familiar. It's disturbing when people, I don't know why it disturbs me when people say that. And I believe you, Corky. We've heard it so many times from very legitimate people. This is kind of what they do, and I think you're right. I think they're probably trying to lure the dog out.
Right.
So they kept coming and tormenting. I know there was one time you're in the forest, and I don't want to get you too far off your timeline, but you and I were talking about you thought you heard your dog whimpering.
Okay. I'm squirrel hunting. I'm sitting back on the third tier, which would be the highest part of the ridge, and I'm just panning down. I'm just looking for squirrels. And again, it's the time wise would be 4:30. Everything was quiet, then all of a sudden I heard my dog. He started barking. I'm trying to locate, because I'm on top of the ridge, and I'm trying to get my bearings. Where's the sound coming from? Because it sounds like it's coming out of the bottom of the ravine. It's like the dogs, he runs on a chain. I have a runner. So, and it's like, wait a minute. There is no way my dog is down there in the ravine. I do not allow him in the woods when I'm hunting, especially squirrel. So, I'm sitting there, I'm just listening. I work my way down to the second tier, and so I can get a better look down at the bottom. And I made it probably about a quarter ways down, and I found a nice tree to kneel down beside, and I'm just trying to locate what's making this noise. And it actually sounded like my dog was hurt. It was like that type of noise. And then it started barking, just like my dog barks. I mean, the perfect mimic. And then it started whimpering like it was in trouble. Then I probably listened to this for about 20 minutes. Now it's getting close to 5 o'clock. It's time to stop hunting. When I got up and started walking away, I made it up to the second tier, and I'm walking back home. As I'm leaving, I heard a tree knock down below. So he was either tipping off that I was getting up leaving or something like that. I'm not sure. But I walked down to the house, and the dog was fine. He's sitting there. He was happy to see me, and it just really made me think, okay, what was making this noise? Sounded like my dog down the bottom of that ravine. Now, mind you, down the bottom of this ravine is swampy area. There's a lot of springs coming off our hill. And so there's a lot of high grass, vegetation, briars. I mean, we can be 5 feet away from each other in that ravine. We wouldn't be able to see each other. It's pretty thick stuff.
Cookie, with the mimicking that it was doing, and you were listening for about 20 minutes, did you think that whole time that really was your dog, or was there just something off about it?
I thought it was my dog for the first minute or two, and then I realized, the events that's just taken place recently, and it's like, there's no way I'm going down there.
Right.
Just not doing it. I mean, first of all, at that point in time, I did not know much about the subject, if that is what was making that noise. And the more I learned, the more I realized that I could be walking into a dangerous situation.
Yeah, it sounds like a trap.
It actually felt like I was being lured down into an area where there was no way out.
Yeah, and that's disturbing in itself. So back on your property, did it continue with the tormenting of the dog? I mean, did that continue to go on?
Yes. I mean, it's not night after night. It's not like their main focus, the dog, okay? They were what from the information I gathered through the audio, they were real curious about us in general. They would always, when they would come up to the property at night, they would always toss a pebble up onto either hit the house or hit the deck before they would come out. And, you know, they'd get braver and braver each time they would come. And eventually, you know, they made their way up onto the deck, looking into the house, tapping on our windows, communicating. I believe they work in threes from the audio. I have a recording on my research page. It's called Corky's Research. I think it's titled Bigfoot and the Ghost Train. Well, if you would play that audio at 8 minutes and 58 seconds, I have a recording of them throwing the pebble, hitting the house, and with a gargling whistle. And then they were I believe the juvenile doing that. And then the alpha male was doing the mimicking up by our burning area. And it was actually, it was a gargle noise. My dog don't make that type of noise, but it made the gargle noise. And then it went into the mimicking of my dog barking. Now, when these two events took place, my dog went nuts. And I actually have a recording of it. So if you feel free, you can check that out.
And Corky, you guys have been inside the house and have seen like massive dark shapes outside the windows, that kind of a thing, like after they've thrown the pebbles, like you've seen them look in, you said?
My bedroom is on the second floor, and unfortunately my one dresser is up against the window where I can't just look out the window. I hear the footsteps, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I've got, like I said, I hear, it's mainly the recordings is what I have. I canned peppers in the fall as well. And I can tell you last year, I put up probably 30 pints of hot peppers, and it requires a bunch of chopping of garlic. And I only took the best pieces of the garlic that went in my peppers. So I have all these stems and pieces of garlic. I probably had about 1.5 quarts of pieces of garlic. I left out on the banister, and I set the recorder out that night to see what would happen. He came up on the porch, and he walked over, hit the picnic table. He was kind of clumsy, and then he went over, and I have a recording of him sniffing, and it sounded, and half of the garlic was taken, and then he sneezed after he was sniffing. He sneezed, and then he let out a belch. So I don't know if he was eating it, but there was a belch. And then I'm trying to recall. Yes, that was the recording where I actually played it for a buddy of mine. Where after he messed with that garlic, he was actually talking. He was talking like a drunk guy, like something like that. I got a recording of that, which totally blew me out of the water.
Is that available online as well, Corky?
I don't believe I put that online. No,
Okay.
No, I didn't. But I can find it, and I can probably get it to you guys or get it up on the webpage. I do have a lot of audio files, and they're not organized, unfortunately. But it takes a long time to listen through them and find the exact episodes what I'm talking about. But but most of the events, they come onto the property, they inspect it to make sure nobody's around, and then they move their focus to my dog. So there's a lot of tree knocks involved, your standard, your whoops and whistles, but eventually it leads to beating on the dog kennel, trying to get that dog out of the kennel.
Yeah, and you heard that one night, didn't you? Them,
yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
It woke
you heard
me
them.
up.
Yeah. Tell that story, Corky. When they were beating on it, and then you could hear them kind of chattering back and forth.
Well, that's exactly what took place. Is I heard a big crash. Then I woke up. I got my bearings, and the dog is just barking like no tomorrow. I'm like, what's going on? That is the night. But there was some really crazy activity. I opened up my son's window. I seen something moving back in behind our trees. Again, I'm just waking up. I'm trying to focus. It's pitch dark, and all I can hear is just crashing and beating. That evening, the juvenile was up on the porch messing around. He took a stick and beat it actually on our deck. I did hear that. Then it was messing with the air conditioner. It was plucking the air conditioner like it was a guitar. I actually uploaded, I believe, a photo up on your page. It's on my research page of the damage they did to the air conditioner, the AC unit. But again, that adult male stayed back away, and he was like giving instructions to the other two. You know, he was doing gibberish. The juvenile was making a clicking noise with his tongue, answering the alpha male, and the alpha male was doing like a samurai talk. You know, it's like a lot deeper. And then after the alpha male was given instructions, next thing I know, I hear the crashing, just wailing on the top of my dog box. And that's when I opened up my son's room, when my son's bedroom window, and yelled. The next morning, I'm out there taking a look around to see, you know, what the heck was going on. And that's when right behind the dog kennel, we found a small tree that's been twisted in half, and total tree twist, just mutilated this tree. There was another tree that was a little sapling where he just shredded it. We found tracks right by the tree twist. Fortunately, it's rained often that week, so my ground is normally rocky. It's real mountainousy, rocky, hard, so it's hard for me to get a cast. But fortunately, we've had, at this point in time, quite a bit of rain, and he left really nice prints, and I was able to get a cast out of some dental stone.
When we hear these noises going on, does it ever cross your mind to go run down there and flip the lights on and see what's going on?
I do have a high power flashlight, and that's what I was doing in my son's room at 4:30 in the morning, shining. And when I did that, I seen something large and black was running back, not running, but moving away from me, climbing back up in the hill. And that's really all I seen that night. So yeah, I do have a high powered 900 luminous flashlight.
I was wondering about the dogs, because we hear this a lot, that they like to mess with dogs, like they're just always angry with dogs. I was wondering, would there be any reason that your particular dogs might be an annoyance to them? Like, do they bark a lot at random times during the day or night or anything like that?
Yes, he does like to bark. Anything that moves through our woods, he lets everybody know, or he's very territorial. I actually put our dog on his leash, and I took him back up where these creatures were in the area where we believe they were, and he got on their scent, and he started taking us way back in the back. I mean, he wanted to go. He was literally pulling me to follow that scent. I stopped him. I didn't want any problems. So, but he was acting like a bloodhound. One morning when I let him out, I mean, the dog's really passive. He really just let me out, let me do my business. No, there was none of that. We let him out one morning after a long night where the creatures were screwing with him, and he instantly went into like a bloodhound effect and just started sniffing the ground really bad. And he went around to the backside of his dog box, and the first thing he did was he peed on his dog box. Now my dog never does that, and for a few weeks later, that's all he was doing, is wanting to pee on this one spot of his dog box, and just sniffing the ground, and he started barking, and he looked back at me, and he's barking to me, and he's sniffing the ground and barking more, and he's looking up in the woods, and just like he's just trying to communicate with me, you know. This is where he was. This is what he did, you know. And you know, the dog understands. He thinks he's pretty safe, but he gets very upset when these creatures do come around.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that I guess we should probably mention is the unintentional feeding that you were doing of them. You know, you had a compost pile, and any leftovers you were kind of throwing them in this compost pile. And didn't you notice that they were starting to take stuff out of that? They were actually going through the leftovers that were being thrown. And do you still do that by chance? Do you still do the leftovers?
Yeah, actually, I do right now because, like I said, again, they're not here, and I don't notice any activity. It starts usually sometime in July.
Yeah.
So I don't believe they're around right now. So yes, I will. I will throw out my scraps now. I'll either give them to the dog, or if it's parts that the dog can't eat, I'll throw it over our hill into the ravine and let the animals eat it. I will do that now, but I did learn the hard way, not by doing that first year, I believe that's one of the reasons why they started coming back, because, you know, 3 or 4 nights a week, they were getting leftovers from dinner, and they found a free meal. And, you know, if they are scavengers at night and they're looking for anything, I mean, yeah, that's an easy meal. I threw a turkey out, and it was gone by morning, you know.
Yeah.
Then I started noticing, you know, they had a path that was coming off the top of the hill on the side of the ravine down the tree line, and I'm seeing large footprints. I put my foot up beside it, and it's 2, 3 times as wide as mine. It's like, wow, I'm just totally amazed. I took pictures and put it on my research page, and that's what started. I said, I need to start document this. So it's time stamped. You know, I can use it. I can use the information in the future if people ask me, well, when did this happen? That way it would be time stamped. So yes, I started a research page and started recording all of this activity around the house. Every couple of weeks, take a walk, take a hike back up on the ridge. And then I started noticing my trees are being knocked over. And just like the first year, I probably counted 9, 10 trees. You know, we're talking anywhere from 6 to 10-inch trees are being pushed over. Now this is like in the back part of the property where it's a very narrow area, which I call the second tier. And they were knocking over trees like, don't come this way. You know, they're like barriers. Last July, there's probably 20 trees down that they've knocked over.
Yeah, and you're not only seeing just knocked over trees, but I've looked at a lot of your photos, and you have some really good stuff in there, but you'll see trees that are snapped, 10, 12 feet off the ground, it looks like, and these are huge, huge trees that are just broke. Right. Something broke them. I mean, and there's a lot going on with a lot of these photos, stuff that, and obviously you're not faking Corky, but I'm saying if people out there look at it, I don't know how you could snap a tree, some of those trees that you see that far up. I mean, this isn't like weather damage. This isn't somebody out there chopping with a axe. I mean, this is like someone took the tree and just snapped it in half.
It's an intentional, exactly.
Very intentional, yeah.
So I had a couple of friends I was communicating with last year, and I invited them down. And I took them up to the second tier, and I was showing them some of my evidence. And on our way back, we stopped and looked way up on top of the hill. And this is the first time I ever seen this. We seen a tree. It was right up to the big field. Now, mind you, I can only see like half of the top of the tree because we're way down below it. But something at the bottom of that tree was rocking this tree back and forth. And all of a sudden, it went from like a clock, from 12 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and then it sprung back up. And this wasn't a small tree. This tree was every bit, 80 foot off the ground. And the only two things that could have done that was a bear or a squatch.
Before we get to your encounters, when you actually saw them, one of the stories I wanted you to kind of recount, because it was an interesting story. I've been told off of the air, as you and I talked about, Corky, I've been told the same story off the air. We've never really put anything like this on the air. But Mike Humphreys almost had an identical story like this. I have another gentleman who had an identical story like this. Can you tell the story about when you found the bedding area and then decided to urinate all over it?
Okay. Now this refers to, when they really first made their presence on my property. Okay. And I'm thinking I need to deter them. Now, at the time, I didn't have any IR cameras up, and I was being advised I needed to get some. Now, I found a spot where this creature has made an area over the ravine where he's taking two trees that were grown up out of the ravine. It's like a 60-foot high wall, just straight down. He picked up an old dead tree, carried it up, and lodged it in between the two trees. And what he was doing was he made himself a platform where he can stand on, and if he stands up, he can look over the ravine and watch our dog, and then easily just duck down. He had a little platform there, and he was making himself just a little bit too comfortable. And I started calling around, talking to people about what can I do to get rid of these, and they said, well, you need to put an IR camera up. Well, I didn't have the funds at the time, so I decided I'm just going to walk up to his area and I'm just going to pee all over it, to let him know this is mine. This is our property. You're not welcomed here. I mean, if he's a wild animal, he would understand that, and, I didn't think nothing about it. And again, I'm in a habit of recording my evenings, because the activity is just unbelievable at this time. And so I set up my audio recorder the following night, or that night, and the following evening I'm listening to it, and I actually hear the pebble hit the house. He's making sure the coast is clear. It's right around 3 a.m. in the morning. He comes up on my deck. He taps on the window. I hear a tapping noise on glass. And then the next thing I hear is him urinating on my deck. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So this thing's trying to dominate me. It's like I peed in his area. He came up onto our deck and peed. And it smelled like urine the next morning. I'm like, Are you kidding me? Till this day, my dog box has a very distinct smell of where that squatch was peeing on his box as well. I mean, it's rank.
Yeah, I know. Mike Humphreys had a similar story to that. He kind of did the same thing and had the same type of result. Let's jump into your encounters. Tell us kind of what you were doing and what happened when the first time you had seen them.
We actually had another event, another evening where he had pushed over a wild cherry tree right behind the dog kennel. And I went ahead and cut up that firewood and split it, and fall was setting in, and I said, I'm just going to burn it. And that's what I did. It was like 5:30 in the evening, and I started a fire, and all the ground was soaking wet. So when the fire started, it smoked very, very bad, and that smoke just got sucked down into the ravine. It was just traveling all the way back the hillside. I would say 10 minutes later, I heard something out of the bottom of that ravine just crash and just run as fast as possible up on the ridge. Now, I bet it took them 9 seconds to get to the top. And at this point in time, I couldn't see what it was, but it was massive, whatever it was. It was just massive. It just when it was just running, I could hear it. It was breaking brush. It was on a mission. So the following day, I wanted to have another fire, see what would happen. So I repeat the process. I'd like to fire, and I'm sitting there, and it's about 5:30 in the evening, and I'm just looking for any type of movement. You know, I'm a hunter, so I mean, I'm looking. I'm trying to finally, you know, get my Class A sighting. And I'm sitting in my lawn chair, and I'm just panning, and all of a sudden I saw him. He was poking his head out behind of a tree. I just repaired my buddy's parabolic, so I was testing it. I grabbed that, and it had a little viewfinder through this parabolic, 6 times power, I believe. And I'm looking through this viewfinder, and I can see him as plain as day. Now, the lay of my land slopes uphill, so I could only catch the upper part of his body. But this creature had to be every bit somewhere in the ballpark between 11 to 12 foot tall, and he was dark red, like a red-tailed fox. He kept his distance, but I seen the face. He had a forehead. He had a long, wide nose, long hair coming off of his cheeks, 4 to 6 inches. But I mean, this creature does not camouflage well. It was red. At this point in time, we're talking at 9:30 in the morning. This would have been a Saturday morning when I seen this creature. Now, I seen 3 of these guys all in 1 week of last September, and so I kept playing with that campfire each day to see if I can get another sighting. And I started to fire one night.
I'm kind of curious, when you were looking at it, what was your impression of it?
The very first impression of seeing this creature made my hair stand up on the back of my neck. Let that be said. And then once I realized he is leaning up against a tree, he's not being aggressive, I remained motionless, and I watched him for about 15 minutes. And we just looked at each other back and forth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was seeing something that appeared to be somewhat human looking, but in the same sense, something I've never seen before in my life. And it's like what I imagined what my first experience would look like. It was totally way off. He was very unique looking. He was making expressions on his face. He was really watching me. He was seeing what I was doing. And then I remember looking away and then looking back, and he was gone. And then a few minutes later, I would say 6 to 10 minutes later, I looked back, and he came back for a brief moment, and then he was gone again.
Corky, what were the expressions that it was making, or your impression of the expressions he was making?
He was making, I could see him like rolling the upper lip. The upper lip I was looking through the parabolic, and he kept lifting up that upper lip. He wasn't making no noise. I mean, now mind you, he wasn't that close. I was looking through a magnifier to view him. But yeah, he kept rolling his upper lip up. And like I said, there was hair. The hair was hanging from his face. The cheeks had hair. Above the lip had hair, and it hung off his chin. Okay, but the forehead had no hair. There was, I mean, the wind was coming down off the hill, and I could smell a very strong sulfur, musty dog smell that was permeating through the air. And then once he left, so did the smell.
Did it make you think twice about going back out there squirrel hunting?
Well, now I won't go in the woods with somebody else. I have a buddy of mine I'll call if I'm going to do any hiking or hunting or, I refuse to go in the woods by myself now. It's from everything, especially after I turned into your show and started listening, From everything that I was taught as my father when I was a young man, the old information was vegetarian. Leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. Well, I started listening to the Squatch Chronicles, and you guys have a 180-degree different idea of, that these creatures are not safe, and they are hunting people sometimes. People in the 411, people are coming up missing. No, I'm not going to go by myself into an area where I know where these creatures are.
Yeah. I know you describing the red one, but it made me think, you're seeing this thing up there and it's watching you and it's keeping a close tabs on you, and it's 9:30 in the morning. It almost makes you wonder if it was kind of a sentry for the group, if the group was nearby sleeping and you were just kind of it was keeping an eye on you. So after you have this encounter, you go back night after night, you light the fire up, and what happened next?
I believe it was a Thursday. Around 5:30, I go ahead and start a fire again, get out the lawn chairs. Really nothing's going on yet. My son comes outside. Now the whole time, my son has been, I've been telling my son what's been happening, a lot of the events, a lot of the recordings, we talk about this every day. I'm trying to get more out of his story because he was totally shell-shocked when he had that one bull rush him. So I'm sitting there. He sits down. We're talking, and I was telling my son my Class A sighting where I saw this red one. And I said I pointed. And this is where he's at. Keep an eye out right there. We might get lucky and get another view of him. So we're sitting there, we're just chatting. Then we hear a tree knock from top of the hill. It was probably the next 15 minutes that we had one of them playing peekaboo with us behind a tree on the very top of the hill. I seen him first. I pointed him out to my son. My son watched that tree for about another five more minutes, and then my son saw him peeking on the other side. And he was swaying back and forth, and then he stepped out of the tree, so he was in full view. Now we both watched this thing. I mean, again, this creature was all in red. He was just watching us, just checking our fire out, I think is what he was doing, and he wasn't frightened. He was approximately 80 yards up on the hill above us, just standing there watching us. My son got up from his chair, walked over to the edge of the ravine, and looked up another angle, and he yelled, "Dad, there's two of them. I see another." And I said, what color is he? He says, "All black, Dad." He said he's only he's shorter. He's not as tall as the other. And I said, "Well, how tall?" He said, "Probably 8 foot." So there were two of them up there watching us. And Corey come back over and said, "Dad, I want to go in." I said, "Yeah, I think it's a good idea." And for two of them watching us, we just went in. So we gathered our things. So no, I left my lawn chairs there, and we went in the house, and we watched from the window, but we didn't see him, come down or check us out or anything. But
you can't blame me there.
Right. But we both had another Class A sighting, and I'm telling you what, it's almost like a high. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, this is so addictive. I can't wait to see them again. But in the other hand, I don't want them here. You know what I mean? It's like mixed emotions. I know in one hand they can kill you and rip your arms off and legs off and possibly eat you. And on the other hand, it is the most exciting creature. It's a very interesting creature that I'm wanting to learn more about.
It's kind of the adrenaline rush. Either people take two separate paths after they've had an encounter, they'll either freak out, shut down, and don't talk about it, or they'll want to see him again. But even when you freak out, shut down, and don't want to talk about it, you eventually get to a point where you almost kind of want to see it again. You almost kind of want to, you really want to see him again. So I can understand that. How's your son doing? I know he's kind of is he still kind of having a tough time after his encounter?
Yes. My son is still traumatized from the event. He refuses to talk anything about it. If I bring the subject up, he'll leave the room. He doesn't want to hear about it. He's had nightmares. He's actually drawn sketches of the creature. Totally shell-shocked. He had a bad experience. He did talk to some buddies at school, and they started making fun of him. They started making fun of him, and it didn't go well. And he's totally, in one hand, I took him to Salt Fork with me last summer camping, and we had some activity down there, and he enjoyed it, thought it was fun and all. But the minute we came back home, it was okay. I don't want to talk about it no more. He shuts down when he comes back here.
Yeah, and I can't blame him. And like I said, you have my cell phone number, Corky. If he wants to call and talk to me, have him do it. I mean, off the air, I'd be happy to talk with him. I mean, I can understand that feeling. God, especially since it's your home, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's supposed to be your safety.
I did talk to him about it, and I said, if you want to talk to Wes, I said he'd glad to hear your story, and he's pretty knowledgeable on the subject, and he might be able to help you on how to dealing with it, because you're not the only one this happened to.
Yeah, I mean, and I had my own aggressive encounters, so I can understand completely the way he's feeling. I mean, God, I think anyone that had that type of encounter that he had, I can't imagine them feeling any other way, especially when one charges you. I think probably what happened, just from hearing a small portion of the story, like we mentioned, I think it was probably after the dog. These things tend to go for an easy meal, and I think probably when it got face to face with your son, I know Shannon hears me say to my girlfriend when we go out, don't run. Whatever you do not run. And I think what he did in that situation is perfect. He didn't run. Yep. He stood there and stood his ground. And these things are, as you know, Corky, these things aren't stupid. Probably realized at that moment, even though he's looking at a 14, 15-year-old kid, he's got his shoulder pads on. He's obviously not running. He's not scared. For a meal, that's probably going to be your last choice for a meal, because it may not be worth it in the end. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
From their point of view. Have you noticed any deer kills? Have you noticed any animals or livestock being killed around the area?
Well, I will share with you that our neighbor's dog came up missing right before all this started. It was a blue heeler, and this dog ran. The owner didn't keep it tied up, so it would, I'd let my dog out at 7:00 in the morning, and within a minute, the blue heeler would be down there trying to eat my dog's dog food. I don't think the owner really fed it. So it was always down here scavenging some food. And so it was like clockwork. Every morning, the blue heeler would be in the backyard, and right about this time, beginning, I would say sometime in July, he just stopped coming around. And I next time I seen the landowner, the landowner believes a bunch of coyotes got him. We don't know for sure. He just knows it came up missing. Now we did have a high population of coyotes on our property. It wouldn't be nothing to go out and, when I'm deer hunting, you'd see them like crazy. One evening I watched 3 or 4 coyotes chase 4 or 5 deer across the field trying to get a meal. So we had a lot of coyotes, and ever since the activity started around here in the last couple of years, I have not seen a coyote at all. I mean, I believe they're gone. I believe that is what the main menu on their diet. I believe the Squatch like to eat the coyotes. I truly do, because they were a real nuisance around here, and there's not one left.
Corky, what about your neighbors? Do you talk to them at all? Have any of them reported activity around their houses?
I have a neighbor not too far away from me that she actually called me to come out to take a walk on her property, because her son reported to them. He was out on his four-wheeler, and him and his buddies were out riding out on their farm, and this was at night, full moon, and they looked up the hill, and they actually seen what appeared to be a very tall beast, hairy beast, looking down at them. And they seen prints and tracks. I went to school with the mom. She knew about my research page, and she contacted me and asked me to come out, and I called a couple of my friends from the Sosby group, and we went out there and did a night investigation, and there is activity out at their farm. She just contacted me not too long ago asking, will they eat cats? And I said, I believe they do eat the cat, because she's missing a couple of her cats now. But yeah, so I do have some neighbors that have reports of Squatch activity, yes.
And one thing that I think is valid to point out, we talk about these trail cameras all the time and the infrared and how they don't like the infrared. Obviously, we're hypothesizing they don't like the infrared, but there's been a lot of reports, like I told you, with the siege of Honabi, and other reports that I've taken from people who, the minute they start putting up infrared cameras around their property, I know Mike Humphreys, he had drilled these, I think I told you these trail cameras, he had drilled them into his home underneath his window so they'd stop coming up and tapping on the window, and he told me it worked. It stopped them from doing it. But you kind of had noticed that too with your dog kennel. Can you talk a little bit about that? You put up infrared.
Sure.
Yeah.
First of all, a buddy of mine offered to set up some trail cams for me. Because I was complaining that, when they're getting just too close. They're getting too close. I'm starting to fear for my life now. I'm afraid they're going to break into the house. So a buddy of mine came down. We set 3 trail cameras up on different points, all different areas of the property. The trail cams did not deter them. Up in the woods, they started moving the trail cams, facing them down. We had one on a tree that was falling over. I had it like eyes, and they changed the location of it so it's looking straight down. At another location, they actually moved the cam 90 degrees. And so I'm keeping an eye on these, and one Saturday morning I walk up to the top of the hill. This is in the morning time. I've seen that the camera's been moved. So I'm taking the bungee cords off, I'm resituating it and getting it back. I have it aimed on the kennel. So if something comes in on the kennel, I'm going to get video of it or a picture. So I'm resituating the camera, and I hear all of a sudden this real loud, high pitch sound that I've never heard before. The next thing I know, it felt like I got hit in the chest with a brick, and I instantly got ill and dropped to my knees. I don't know if that's what you call the infrasound, but I was being bombarded by something that really made me ill. I mean, it shook me up for days. When this was hitting my chest, it took everything I could to step behind the tree to block it, so I can get my bearings to figure out, okay, which way's home. Now, mind you, I'm at clear top of my hill. All right, I was that disoriented. I'm within 90 yards of my home, and I was totally did not know which way was up or down. and it really affected me. I felt the effect for 2 days. And I do believe I actually threw up that evening because of being hit with something from that creature.
Was it just that one incident that made you sick, Corky?
Yes.
Yeah. Once is enough, I'm sure, but yeah.
They moved the camera, and I was readjusting the camera at the time, and I actually heard this high-pitched noise coming from the field, which was probably about 50 yards in front of me off to my right, off our property. And I heard this high-pitched hum, or whatever you want to call it, and I wasn't even looking. I was getting the bungee cord connecting to the camera, and once that was done, I looked into that field. I stepped out away from the trees into a clearing, and I'm looking into the field, and I got hit like a brick.
It's kind of strange timing, don't you think? While you're messing with the cameras.
Oh, it definitely did not want me messing with that camera. Yeah. Definitely. And that's not the first time. I was telling Wes when we were talking, the intro to your guys' show, when they said I was running down the hill, and not your show right now, but like 4-6 months ago, you guys had the exact sound on your intro of that high pitch noise. And that's what attracted me to your show, because I'm trying to figure out what the heck, what was that noise? What did I just hear? And you guys have it recorded on your intro. So that's what lured me into your show.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious, around the dog pen, you had put up infrared cameras or infrared lights, and they stopped messing with your dog at that point.
Yes, I did find something that worked, and it works very well. From Harbor Freight, they're an IR night light, what you would install in a hallway of someone's house. It's battery operated. A bunch of LEDs. There are probably 20 LEDs in each one. Well, I mounted a pair of these 15 feet back behind the dog kennel onto those pine trees, one on each side, in their motion. So it was really nice. So I could, I put the dog away at night, and my motion set them off. It lit the whole area up. Worked very well. And then once I had those installed, they've never bothered the dog since.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And you hear so much from what Corky's saying that we've heard in the past. I mean, just there's so much to it. A lot of people, like even with the Siege of Hanabi, things started ramping up. A difference, though, I think, with how these things is they're only there, it seems like, for a certain period of time, and then they're going through a travel corridor, moving to another feeding area. What's kind of next in your plans as far as we come up to July again? Obviously we're hoping they'll or I assume you're hoping they'll come through that area again. But what's kind of next in your plans for the next time that they pass through?
With some luck, I really hope this year I can actually get some good video or pictures of the creature. I mean, I would love to be able to prove the existence of them.
And Corky, is it the alpha male, the assumption of the alpha, the big red, is that the one that usually comes up to the house then, you think?
No. The alpha stays back. He sends out the commands, and then the others, it's like a small clan. There's either 3 or 4 of them. I believe there's a female, the adult alpha, there's a juvenile, and then there's a baby. The cast that I made that's on my research page, it's 13 inches long and right around 7.5 inches wide at the very top, thickest part of the casting. And I believe that is the juvenile, the 13 inch. Yeah, the juvenile is the one that's the curious, that comes up on the porch, that's, real, wants to look in the windows, wants to tap on glass, play with the baffles of the AC unit. I believe it's the juvenile.
Have you ever seen them up in the trees at all?
At Salt Fork, we have with a flare. Yes.
Oh, cool.
But not on my property. Not on my property.
What makes you think there's a baby there?
I have found tracks of, it's only about 6 inches long and about 3 inches wide. Tracks of a little baby. Footprint. I actually have a photo of it, and it's up on my research wall.
Do you have any ideas as far as getting pictures or any videos? Do you have any, are you thinking about this next year, kind of some plans that you're going to try, some ideas you're going to try?
There's a member of our Sosby group. She has the flare, and I'm hoping to invite her over and do a night investigation. You brought something to my attention that I may try. Like I said, I do a sound blast once a year, usually September 21st, on the anniversary from the first party night that we had. I had another following party where I invited all the Sosby group up, and we did a night investigation. And the funny thing about this is when I actually put all these investigators back on my property, and we were there all night long. And when we first went back up on top of the hill, we had a rock thrown at us, but all the rest of the activity soon stopped, and they moved on. And I did my sound blast that evening, and then later, now mind you, everybody's out in the woods, and we're communicating by cell phones, text messaging back and forth, and the activity was across the road. We had 2 rocks thrown at us on my deck, but no activity behind my house back in the woods. Those creatures are so smart. They knew we were back there. They circled around. They crossed Route 30, and they were on the other side of the road. And when I finished sound blasting, I walked to the north end of my deck, and I'm just looking over the hill from my deck, and a rock come hurling in and hit the railing, I would say 6 inches from where my hand was. Now,
wow.
Everybody is back behind my property. We're talking way back in. We're talking, good 50-minute hike. And this rock come from the other direction, and they all came back, we didn't get nothing. And I understand when you're going out for a swatch night, and you look, even if you're in an area that gets a lot of activity, a lot of times they won't do anything, because it's not every night. It's just every couple nights. When you're lucky, they make themselves known. But that night, I had 2 rocks got hurled in. I had 2 friends sitting on the porch that was just monitoring the situation, just wanting to experience it. And they're the ones that said, wow, that was a rock, and I said, exactly. They're not behind our house. They're across the road. So that's how smart they are.
And it was a pretty good shot too.
Exactly. I will share one other thing. Everyone, I've heard a lot of people say, well, they're not very accurate. They're kind of clumsy. I kind of disagree, because one, I do have an experience where I was minding my own business just by the campfire, and this was probably a week after I had my Class A sighting in September. I had a walnut hurled at me, if I was going to guess, 60 miles an hour, that hit the inside of my thigh. Okay? And now, mind you, I'm viewing the top of my hill, looking to have another sighting, and this came from below the ravine. Mm. So I would say it was very easy to say 60 plus yards away. And for them to hit me right where they hit me, I'm sitting in a chair. Okay. Mm. And to hit me with a walnut, it come in hot. Like I would say every bit what a 12-year-old could do with a baseball. It come in hot. And they weren't messing around. So I've had many warning warning shots where they miss you by 6 or 10 feet. They're just lobbing them in to say, hey, get out of here. This time he hit dead center.
Did you stay after that?
No, I actually got up. I went inside and I had a bruise there for a month.
Wow.
So,
yeah. Acorns don't fall up hills, right? You're just like,
exactly.
Sure, I know what that was. Yeah.
A walnut.
Yeah.
You know, with a husk on it. So, I mean, we're talking about half the size of a baseball.
Yeah. Ouch.
So,
that's terrible.
Yes, it hurts.
Hearing you talk, Corky, it's like a checklist of things that we have heard before, and it's just amazing. They're very intelligent, and they definitely, tend to have the same behaviors all over the country. It's very interesting.
There's, like Shannon says, there's a lot of the behavior that we hear. There's a lot of things going on there. The only thing, obvious advice I would give you is be careful, because, I think at the end of the day, you're dealing with a wild animal. So definitely be careful. I mean, it's not a wild boar that's just gonna, they're gonna pick and choose their battles, but it's interesting, like the baby crying mimic that you heard. I've heard that one too. I've had a few people tell me they thought, they heard a baby crying out in the woods, and they were about halfway into going to find out where the baby's crying. They realized it wasn't quite a baby. It was off a little bit. There was something not quite right about
reports. It. Yeah, I don't like those. That creeps me out.
And then they felt like they were being lured into the forest. You had mentioned the train before, Corky, with regard to what I think you called the ghost train, and we was mimicking that sound. And I think I told you that Mike Humphreys, they kind of lived kind of by a road, the highway. He was talking about how they would mimic the sounds of trucks passing by. And it always threw him off because he couldn't quite understand why it wasn't a truck, but it was like something trying to make the sound of a truck passing by, which I thought was a real odd mimic. But that wasn't the first time, again, I've heard something like that, and they were mimicking the train you were talking about.
That is correct. The ravine down over my house, if you would travel about 12 miles north, that would be the closest train. And that was right in the area where those other sightings were that made the newspaper, and it had, which started all of this with the sightings. And I'll share one other thing. When I talked about the parabolic, I actually fixed it for a buddy of mine. And when he came down to pick it up, he brought his wife, and it was in the evening time, about 9:00, and he asked if he could, hang out for a while to see if his wife would like to hear some activity. So we went up around the fire pit, and I made a fire, and he ended up staying till about 1:00 that evening. We had some rock clacking, and we heard a lot of action down by the creek using his parabolic. So, but anyhow, it's getting late, and I told him, I said, we should probably wrap this up. I said, I need to get to bed. And, I was actually just folding up the chairs, picking up, they were cleaning up their stuff. And as we were doing so, and I was putting the fire out, right over the ravine, not more than 25 yards away, the largest, shrillest scream come at, was this thing just let out a huge scream. It was like my friends, they were actually walking halfway back the yard. They stopped, dropped everything, and come back and said, what was that? And I said, it wasn't a bobcat, because bobcats don't make those type of noises. I said, that had to have been that female. It was crazy. I mean, all her hair standing up, and it's like, I'm telling you what, that it knew we were leaving. It was either upset that we were leaving, or I don't know, but it scared the crap out of us.
I can imagine.
Thank you so much for coming on. Very, very interesting.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. And keep us up to date. Let us know what's going on out there as summer approaches. Let us know if activity picks up. Wish I was out there. I'd love to come come see it,
Yeah,
firsthand.
you're
And
jealous right now, aren't you, Wes? Because I'm pretty close.
yeah, no
That's
kidding.
right, Shannon. You can probably come up some evening.
I would absolutely love to, and I would do it in a heartbeat.
Cool. Well, yeah, get a hold of me. Maybe on the 21st of September, I just might do it again, and I'll let you know if you're able to make it.
That would be awesome. Thank you, Corky.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, thanks,
Yeah.
guys. I had a good time.